Welcome to the ChangeMakers podcast, brought to you by the Lipscomb Pitts Breakfast Club. This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are giving back and making a difference, so we can learn and do the same. We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose. Now, here's our host, Jeremy Park.
Welcome to the first ChangeMakers podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We get to kick it off with someone who he's always our go-to. He's the guy that when we launched our radio show, I said, Michael Drake, I want you to be our first guest. When we launched our TV show, The Spark, I said, Michael Drake, I want you to be our first guest. So he knows how this works very well. He's our good friend. He's a charter partner of the Lipscomb Pitts Breakfast Club. He's been in it since the very inception, but he's the CEO, the founder of masterIT. He's a good friend. Michael Drake, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. It's always great to be with you.
So normally we talk a lot about your company, masterIT, and we'll cover that a little bit. But I do want to start because the fun of this podcast, when you talk about changemakers, it's a chance to get to know the heart. It's a chance to get to know your personal story and really what's led you to do as much as you've done in terms of giving back, your philanthropy side, but really so much that you do with students across our great area, our region here, and we'll cover that as well with the Mile and Lead programs. But for starters, you grew up here in Memphis. Give us a little bit of your story, your childhood story, living and being raised here in Memphis.
Sure. Well, I'm a native Memphian. I was raised at a time when it was different in Memphis. Actually, I was raised by my grandparents almost exclusively, and I know exactly where I was on April 4th, 1968. I was 5 years old, riding my bicycle down Colonial Road. And that was a seminal moment. That was the moment that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and things really changed in Memphis. It was very polarizing. People who were downtown that could leave did. And there began a 40-year journey of here we've almost come full circle. And I was raised in a private school environment, so I was afforded a great education when education was a challenge in Memphis. Went to then Memphis State University, went into what was then the savings and loan industry at the beginning of its financial crisis, and that kind of started my career. I lived away from Memphis for some years, returned in 1990, and I've been here ever since.
Being raised by your grandparents, I want to talk about some of the transitions career-wise, but go back to being raised by your grandparents. Give me one or two things when you look at some of the lessons learned, the structure that they probably gave you, the sacrifices they had to make, obviously. Give me one or two things that stand out from them, because that's a little different than having maybe your mom or dad. You've got your grandparents raising you.
Right.
Talk about that relationship.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest point for me is I grew up in a divorced home. My parents were divorced when I was 4, and in 1966, that was an oddity. So that was different, and they made me feel loved, and they gave me a very stable family environment. That's number one. Number two, because I think they were older and had more experience in life, they were able to impart a lot of wisdom to me. I feel like an old soul, and I think they imparted that to me. And then I think they just had a unique perspective on life and on Memphis. They were not from here. My grandfather was a first-generation immigrant from Germany. My grandmother grew up as a sharecropper in Mississippi. So I had a unique view of the world at a very young age.
So transitioning Memphis State, University of Memphis now, go Tigers. But give us an idea of what that was like. So obviously you said private school growing up, transitioning over to a public university, fairly large in terms of size. What was that like going to Memphis State? Well,
I think it's a relative term, and maybe I would preface it by saying I was afforded a private school education, but I grew up very middle class. So I had to work my way through, and I played golf. So I have a theory that in life, and I've talked about this because you did the same thing. In life, we all play sport as long as we can until we have to go get a real job. So I grew up playing golf, and I had the opportunity to walk on the golf team at the University of California at Irvine. I was an anteater, but I found out very quickly after I arrived that I didn't have the talent for major college golf. So I had a bit of a detour. That was a great learning experience, but when I came back to Memphis, I had to work my way through school, and it took me 5.5 years to get out of school because I worked 35, 40 hours a week. And I worked at O'Call, which is a 157-year-old traditional clothing store. It's one of the finest clothing stores in the world. And I met so many people. So the reason I tell you that story is my good friends at the University of Memphis might not appreciate this, but I learned more outside of the classroom than I did inside. Now, I will say the quality of the education has improved dramatically. in the last 30 years. But just the ability to interface with so many different types of people to understand that you cannot judge a book by its cover. And I saw a lot of covers at Oak Hall. It was a lesson in life.
And I think that will actually pave the way to a conversation we'll have later about the Lead in the Mile program, the benefit of learning all the intangibles, the employability skills outside of the classroom, because you know that you're getting a lot of knowledge in the classroom, but that doesn't necessarily give you the well-roundedness you need to succeed. Go back to Oak Hall, though, because I think knowing you, one of the things you talk a lot about is working there taught you a lot about dealing with people, different personalities, but customer service. Talk about that customer service focus learned obviously out of the classroom, but in a place like Oak Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I get chills when I think about it, because everything I know today about customer service I learned then at Oak Hall. And the reason being is they're a family, and they treat everyone like a family. So it's a home, and when you walk into the store, you feel like you're a part of that. And there's nothing that anybody there that I worked for ever asked me to do that they didn't do or model themselves. And that sounds like a simple lesson, but it's a lesson in humility, and it's authentic. And so that really kind of taught me about service. And I don't think you can really teach it so well. I think you model it and you attract it. But when you see it in its authentic form, it's very attractive, and I want it to be more like that. And so I'm very indebted to so many people, the Levy family at Oak Hall, and the history and the legacy of the people that preceded me. And I still feel a part of that family today.
And you had some celebrity interactions too, right?
I did. Back in the day, ZZ Top recorded all of their albums at Ardent, and we struck up a great friendship with Billy Gibbons. And I didn't appreciate it, I don't think, at the time, of what we were doing and hanging out and, you know, the stories that we could tell or shouldn't tell. It was great, because Billy not only is a fantastic musician, he's a fantastic person, a really bright and brilliant guy, and kind of Renaissance, you know, very interested in other people and other things. And, you know, you'd walk down Beale Street and people would see him, and, you know, you're just kind of part of that. But again, we treated him like we treat everyone else. And again, that was a big lesson too. But I think that attracted him to us.
Well, and I think for anybody who knows you and sees you out in the community, your sense of style, at least they know now where you got that.
Well, the challenge with that is Oak Hall taught me great taste. I didn't pay retail back then. So now it's a little bit more challenging.
Well, switch gears and talk about, obviously, the professional side. So as you said, I mean, obviously you worked through college, and that was a big training ground in and of itself. But then transitioning out, you said the financial services sector, and ultimately you started working pretty heavily in the IT sector. So give us a little bit of that stepping stone out of college and then into the professional career.
Right. Well, it's kind of a comedy. I'll try to be brief, but I had a dream to be in the financial services industry. At the time, Morgan Keegan was the investment banking firm in the South, and I wanted to learn the business from the banker's side of the desk first. I went to work in the then savings and loan industry right as that crisis began. I didn't know it. I went to work for a crook. I didn't know it. So at age 24, I was finding myself in a very difficult position. I thought I might never work again because of this association. But I stood up for the right things, and so by the time I was 25, I had the opportunity to be a crisis manager and run a loan department. So, you know, I went places and did things that other people wouldn't do. But it was so instructive in my early career. So really I was a crisis manager. And what brought me back to Memphis was this then company, very storied company called Econocom USA, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of a French publicly traded company. It was actually started here in Memphis and sold to the French. And that was, you know, we look at disruption in technology today. It was the same principle then. We were going from the mainframe world to the PC world, as we've just gone from the PC world to the mobile world. And they found themselves upside down. So I had the opportunity to come back to Memphis and kind of do the same thing. And that's how I got into technology. And the funny thing about that story is 2 months after I joined, I got fired, but only because the company had been sold. And make a long story short, I never left. I ended up 2 years later becoming the CEO and ran that company for the next 15 years, traveled all over the world, met my business mentor, Jean-Louis Bouchard, who still means a great deal to me. So, you know, talking about University of Memphis, and maybe we'll get to the MILE program, what I learned through that whole process is life is not linear. It's a roller coaster. And to be prepared for that. And it's okay. I mean, that's the way life works.
I know that your mentor encouraged you in a lot of different areas, and one of which was you said you have an idea to do something a little different here in Memphis, to take a model that you thought would work very well, that was scalable. Talk about that transition of starting masterIT.
Okay. Well, I had the opportunity in 2005 to go to Belgium and do the due diligence on the acquisition of a company that provided IT as a service to the small and medium business, the under 500 person company. We bought that company. Jean-Louis gave me a small budget to launch that in the United States. And at the time, we didn't have ubiquity of the internet. We didn't have mobile devices. And small businesses were really struggling trying to figure out how to deliver technology in a consistent manner. So I really felt like we saw the future and what that would be. And in Memphis, we're not known as really early adopters of a lot of things other than Elvis and barbecue. So I was an evangelist and a missionary for a long time in that. But here we are 10 years on the other side, and it's a very accepted model. And so with Jean-Louis and I wanted to do this activity with him outside of the publicly traded company. He thought for me being an entrepreneur was a better idea. In other words, he really launched my career as an entrepreneur. At the time, I was 43. And he said, Mike, if you want to put your big boy pants on, now's the time. He tore up my non-compete and he said, you have my blessing, and any intellectual property we've developed together is yours. And so I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to fly back to Paris and just thank him for that. And we talk all the time, and he's still teaching me. But he did me a great favor.
Yeah, I just think that's a great story. When you talk about someone of that prominence believing in you and saying, you know what, to tear up a non-compete, to say, I believe in you, go do this. Very, very powerful. So you talked a lot about, both of us have, the MILE program, the LEAD program. We've been mentioning those acronyms off and on. But describe both. They're very different in a way. One is geared toward the business students. That's the MILE program. The other one is across all different disciplines throughout the campus of the University of Memphis. Both of them are on the campus of the University of Memphis. The idea is similar in the sense of leadership, development, bringing in business professionals to share expertise and wisdom to help cut that learning curve dramatically so that students get those employability skills, the etiquette, the networking, the social media and the branding, personal branding, resume help, all of those things that you would need that don't necessarily come from a classroom environment but a real world environment, bringing those on the campus and actually taking them off the campus and putting them into application here at businesses. But being able to really show them two things. One is that people want them to stay and that there's a lot of opportunity here, but also, two, that you don't necessarily have to go to a big city to have these experiences that can shape your future, and you can literally become your own destiny maker. But so that's my version, obviously. But give us yours, because you personally were involved in the MILE program since the very inception. Give us a little bit of how you position the MILE program and the LEAD program.
Well, first, that was well said. I wish I could bottle that and take that with me. But
you can now. It's all on tape.
That's right. With the MILE program, it was very interesting because it is focused just on the business school, and that's where I came from. So I had a natural attraction to that. It's more of a formalized one-on-one program over a 9-month period of time, and there are formalized events that are on campus that are typically around speakers. And that one-on-one aspect carries through, as you said, off campus, which is, I think, where the magic really happens, because people bond and you create relationships. And I think for both of the programs, the best thing about them as a mentor is that we're not a student's parent and we're not a student's professor. We're there to be a mentor, and a mentor's job, as I have found and I have experienced, a mentor's job is to ask you, Jeremy, what is it that you want? What's inside of you? What sets your soul aflame? To draw out of you what God already put into you. And then my job is then to say, well, what can I do to help you get there and help you do that? Not to tell you what to do or how to do it, but to really help you discover who you already are. And that's intentional. And so that was my first attraction with the MILE program. I think the beauty, too, of the LEAD program is even though both are in groups, the LEAD program is more of a plug-and-play for mentors and students that's not as formalized, although the people that run the programs, both of them have great curriculum. but it's the opportunity for a mentor to be able to come and go as they need to and establish those relationships, and students don't feel bound to be at every event because everybody's busy and everybody is attracted to different things. So I think both over time are actually kind of morphing to be more like each other and try to emulate the best practices of each. The beauty, of course, of the LEAD program is it goes university-wide for all of the colleges, and so my love of being involved in that is I get to be exposed to even more students than I was than just in the business school. And the final thing that I've learned is they're so much smarter than I was when I went through. All I'm trying to do is make a connection, as you are and as we are, because what we want to do is eliminate that brain drain and retain the best and the brightest in Memphis. And what we've learned is it's not just about a job. It's about getting them involved in the social community, in their faith community, and really touching them on a 360-degree basis so that when they do begin their career, they don't feel like they have to go to Nashville or Dallas or wherever, that there's great opportunity here in Memphis.
And you were instrumental. I mean, you've been on the board of both, so you know both very, very well. And share with us, this is one of your personal passions. I mean, you have three very, very set personal passions of yours, one being kind of the youth development. So working with students, 18, young adults, young professionals, you heavily on the masterIT side, you hire a lot of millennials. So talk about that side of just youth development and working with young professionals, college students, that sort of demographic.
Yeah, well, I'm attracted to 18 to 35-year-olds because they are our future. The other thing about them is they're a different generation, and particularly when we speak of Memphis, they didn't grow up with the baggage that I did of 1968. I have two children, 22 and 14, and they don't look at that, and they don't look at race the same way that we were taught to look at race. And they're very ready to make a difference. And in this city is your living proof that you can come here from anywhere, or you can rise up from within this community and be able to get involved easily and make a difference very, very quickly. And this city has never been more ready or eager for a change. And I think, and I say this a lot, and I don't mean to be the Chamber of Commerce, but it's my belief that by the year 2025, Memphis will be the destination for young professionals for a perfect storm of three reasons. Number one, the cost of living. If you compare Memphis to Nashville today, the cost of living in Nashville is just skyrocketing. Number two is when you look at downtown redevelopment, and every city that has downtown redevelopment is doing well, and the investment that St. Jude is making, which, by the way, the number one industry that college graduates want to go into is the service industry. The number one corporation in the world they want to work for is not Microsoft, it's not Google, it's not Amazon, it's St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Why? Because they want to be in the service industry and serve a higher power. And the third piece of that, the third leg of that stool is this cost of living, and they can make a difference very, very quickly. So I think it feeds all of their needs. So I think it's incumbent upon us as Memphians to set a table for them and help them engage.
Well, it's like anything. As an entrepreneur, it's to me an easy example where you go somewhere where there's a support network where you can get the services, the advice you need, the expertise, the mentorship, but also the funding. So in other words, if you create the right environment, then really good things are going to happen and you can attract the right group. And in this case, obviously with millennials, people who want to make a change, and obviously, I mean, I agree with you 100,000,000%, is that there's no better city in America to be able to come where you've got global resources in a small enough environment where you can connect with people, but you can literally see the difference you can make. I mean, whether it's a smile on a young child, the warmth of a hug from an elderly mother, I mean, it doesn't matter. You can see the impact and the love that you can share in a very, very short amount of time. I mean, I would say it's in 6 months you can do about as much as you could do in Los Angeles in like 5 or 6 years.
And I think we have to be honest about this too, and I think this is attractive to young people, is Memphis is a city that cannot hide its problems. We're one of the few places in America where the affluent and the afflicted live side by side. So if you look at Memphis Country Club, which would be, a symbol of success in Memphis, to its south, you have Orange Mound. To its north, you have Chickasaw Gardens, another affluent community. To the north of that, you have Binghamton. So literally, side by side by side, people of different experiences have to pass each other every day, and that cannot be ignored, and people are not ignoring that.
I agree. So, talked about lead, talked about mile. One of the other things that's really important to you is personal, professional development. And then we'll talk about mental illness because that's the third piece of this. Give us an idea when you talk about personal, professional development, when you talk about working with people, helping them achieve their goals. Describe some of the work you're doing because obviously there's a lot within that range. Mile and lead kind of fall into that a little bit, but give us an idea of some of the other things you're doing there.
Yeah, they do. And the first place I start is where I am every day, which is in our business. And we deal typically with engineers, and they're wired differently than I am. I came up with a finance background, but they're very technical and they're very bright. And most people who are hardwired that way are great at fixing the problem, but sometimes communication is a challenge. And think about anybody who's listening. When you have a problem with your iPhone or your tablet or your notebook, you want it fixed immediately, but you also want to be acknowledged that that's your problem and how that's affecting you. So we try very hard every day. Our second core value in our company is to communicate, and how first, before we begin working on a problem, to communicate that, to acknowledge the person's issue and tell them, here's the expectation, I'll keep you informed until that's resolved. That sounds easy, but that's very difficult, and that is repetitive, that we have to talk about that every day. We did talk about mile and lead, and I was not joking when I said these young people are so much brighter. I think they're exposed to so many more things than I was growing up. However, technology is a challenge to them. In that the face-to-face conversation, what you and I are doing right now, to many people that we encounter, is a challenge for them to be able to express their passion, their ideas, in a mentor-protege relationship. It's important to understand what drives somebody. So we work on that a lot in mile and in lead, and we'll talk about the mental health aspect in just a second. But it's a process like everything else. There's no quick fix, and it all comes down to relationship.
Well, I think that's a huge shift. Is you can Google everything. There's a YouTube video for everything. Now more than ever, YouTube, the dual screen experience is almost surpassing television watching. It's an amazing phenomenon where there's more information coming at you than ever before. There's so many more opportunities, but there's also, because of that, so much more clutter. Right. And to your point now, even as families, you go to a restaurant and you look out and all four family members have their phones out and they're playing games, texting, on email, whatever it is. There's no interaction anymore. And that's a big shift, because when you talk about things like philanthropy, like giving back, like community service, those conversations used to happen at the dinner table. You used to have your parents or your grandparents sitting down with you and saying, how was your day? What was it like? And all of a sudden now those moments are gone. Showing leadership to going out and picking up trash together, little things like that. Kids aren't exposed to that now. So it really is a dramatic shift where if you don't have, as a company, the leadership stepping in saying, hey, look, might not have been a big part of your past, but we're going to make it a big part of your present and future to teach you why communication is so important, right. To teach you the human element of this, but also, too, the servant leadership, the heart side of it, and get you engaged in the community so that you can see how your goodwill will transform your life. Well,
as you're telling that story, it reminds me very much. I was on a week-long trip 2 weeks ago looking at some different social entrepreneur business models, and one of them was John and Dorothea Bon Jovi's restaurant in Red Bank, New Jersey, called Soul Kitchen. And it's a pay-it-forward restaurant, and many of the people that they serve are in need. So there's a stated price on the menu of $10. They serve dinner only. If you can pay, they ask you to pay $20 to pay it forward. If you can't pay, they ask you to volunteer an hour of service, either as a server in the kitchen, in the garden out front. They have a farm that's farm to table, and you can feed a family of 5 that way. I preface this by saying it's a beautiful model, and it's simple and it works, because it's people serving other people without regard of anybody's ability to pay. It's the St. Jude model. Right. And so I had the opportunity, after discussing the business model, where there was a team of us there, got to volunteer and work, and I was the host for the evening, which is interesting because the actual hostess is a trained clinical psychologist. So when people walk through the door, she is a trained professional to look for signs of what's going on. So I had the opportunity to seat and have a meal with a table of 8 autistic people who live on a farm. And, part of the symptoms of autism is really the inability to connect. And just by being there, I get emotional talking about it, but just by being there and connecting with them, a good friend of mine, Tom Shadyac, calls it the moment of transformation. It's the moment you realize why you're here, and we're here to be connected with each other. And I had the opportunity to sit with a mentally ill person who was disruptive, and I watched this hostess be able to diffuse that and to try to recount what that means to me as a human being, to serve another human being. It's almost impossible to put it into words, but I feel it in my heart, and that's why I'm so passionate about it.
Many of you listeners might know the name Tom Shadyac, the Hollywood producer, director, filmmaker, Liar, Ace Ventura, Nutty Professor, Bruce Almighty, goes on and on and on. I mean, billions of dollars at the box office. Had a bicycle accident, a mountain biking accident, concussion, basically was living in a closet, didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And kind of as his last hurrah, went on this adventure to figure out what's wrong with the world, what can we do about it. That was the focus of the documentary, I Am. And came out later with actually through that process, really the ringing in his ears and everything came to pass and was healed in a way. But spiritually it changed his life. And he wrote a book, Life's Operating Manual 2.0. Where this story kind of connects is, well, I'll let you tell some of the story, but he's got a personal tie to St. Jude, but then we brought him in here as a guest speaker, and that's where a lot of this magic happens. So tell the story of Tom Shadyac, and I think that will lead us to the mental illness side, but tell the story of Tom Shadyac.
Well, first of all, before your colleague, Allison Carson, introduced the documentary to I Am, I didn't know Tom Shadyac existed. I mean, certainly I knew those movies, but I didn't link the two. And so God put on my heart the need to start a conversation in the business community about mental health, because by 2020, the number one workplace disability is going to be mental illness, anxiety, and depression. And unfortunately, I'm a subject matter expert. My family has a long history of anxiety, depression, and even suicide. And so when I saw that documentary, I was like, this is the guy. She told me, she said, Mike, this is the guy. So you and I reached out to him, and after we did the dance for a little while, he agreed to speak, and he came 2 years ago. And at the time, I didn't know, and this is the beauty of life. The harder we looked, the harder it became. But Tom was literally underneath our nose because he was teaching his class Storytelling in Life at the University of Memphis. And his tie is his father, Dick, co-founded St. Jude Children's Research Hospital with Danny Thomas and others, was a CEO of ALSAC. His brother, Rick, is the current CEO of ALSAC, who raises over $2 million a day to treat and cure childhood cancer, the most trusted charity in America. And then Tom and I just became friends. He invited me to the class, and I'm a slow learner, so I've been there for 2 years. I haven't left yet. But we show movies and we tell our stories. And movies, just like the meal that I was mentioning at the Bon Jovi's restaurant, are only access points to have a conversation, to realize that we're all connected. So that's the beginning of the journey, and it continues today. Tom is a committed Memphian. He's bought a home here. He has a radio show here now. He's not teaching this semester, but he will be. He's bought a 5-acre campus across from Soulsville in South Memphis that we now call One Family, with the ethos to be like a child of St. Jude and to provide services that community in Memphis needs, but without the need of how are you going to pay. So that's going to require a lot of money to do that. And so just like his brother Rick is ALSAC for St. Jude, it's kind of on my heart to create an ALSAC for One Family.
And you obviously are very, very heavily involved in this. You're a part of the board. I mean, you're really, to me, the right hand, the local right hand here in Memphis for Tom Shadyac to bring this to life. So I love everything you're doing and where your heart's set with this. You mentioned going and doing Soul Kitchen, but that was a part of a larger trip overall. And so you went to many different places looking at best practices. There were a lot of common threads that you found. And you can share a little bit about some of the other places, but really more importantly, share some of those common threads that when you look at the healing agents in other cities and how they're doing it in very different ways, but very creative ways, they do have very common elements that are perfect for what's going to take place here in Memphis.
Yeah, so we went to 3 uniquely different places. When we started One Family, I really wanted to have an instructional trip in terms of these business models. And so there was a Breakfast Club speaker that that you brought in 2009, Bill Strickland, who has done a TED Talk that's been seen a couple of million times now about the Manchester Bidwell Center that he started 48 years ago, that provides adult vocational training and children's arts education training. And to make that long story short, there are now 8 centers in the United States that provide hope and healing in those communities. But what they do is they look for what the need in the community is. So it's not a franchise. It's not replicated in every community. I mentioned the Soul Kitchen, and then the third place we went was a day shelter that Tom started in Charlottesville, Virginia, when he was filming Evan Almighty about 10 years ago. And they serve the homeless in Charlottesville, but they've also placed over 70 families that were homeless in permanent housing. So all of those are unique, but here's what I found that is common in that thread. Number one is they had a very strong visionary, just like Danny Thomas was the visionary of St. Jude. Can you imagine guys sitting around a table and Danny goes, well, we're going to cure childhood cancer? I mean, think about the audaciousness of that. When the survival rate was 20%, today the survival rate is over 80%, and that's in only 50 years. So strong visionaries. Number two is a very loyal and missional management team. It doesn't have to be very many people, but very missional-driven people that you can just count on to get things done. From a funding standpoint, just like St. Jude, very varied funding sources. I mean, many people don't know that the average donation to St. Jude is under $100. It has to take a community invested to be able to support it. It can't be a Tom Shadyac writing a big check or a bunch of big checks. That's not a way to sustain a model. And then all of these places have gone into the community and said, what is your need? And that's what we want to do here in Memphis, is to go to the employers and say, what is your need? And if we train people to do that, are you going to hire them? And can we help break this cycle in these different neighborhoods? I mean, if you think of Soulsville, I mean, it changed the world in terms of modern music and American soul music that today is still celebrated all over the world. We're lucky that we have that gem still there that is being rebuilt. Absolutely. But starting, in the 70s, we as a culture let that gem go away. And I think it's incumbent again upon us as Memphians to look at who we are as a community and to celebrate and to keep those things. And the way to do that is to treat each other like brothers and sisters instead of winners and losers.
I want to go back to the St. Jude model because I think it's really important to understand why it's so successful. I know that when you look at it, having this alternate funding source, it allows you to do whatever you need to do. So in other words, when St. Jude has a patient come in, they're not worried about, well, can we pay for this test? Is it the right thing over here? If it's the right thing to do, period, they're going to do it. And whether it takes 30 tests, 1 million tests, it doesn't matter. They're not looking at the price point. They're looking at the health and the well-being and the future of that child. So when you talk about why this is so important is how can we make this easy and accessible in an area that's impoverished, where money is a factor. If you remove that barrier and you say, you know what, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do to take care of you, all of a sudden that's where the success comes in. It's putting the moral compass above the financial compass. And I think that's extremely important to understand is, St. Jude, the reason they're so successful, and it's been proven, is because the model. They're focused on the child regardless of the finances.
Exactly. I mean, Danny Thomas's, message was no child should die in the dawn of life. And that's, it's easy, I think, to get behind childhood cancer. Those children are born into something that they have no choice an impact on. When we talk about the other cancers, in terms of the emotional and the spiritual and the economic cancers, it's a little bit harder to articulate what that is. But once we leave the dawn of life, we have the rest of life. And once we realize that we're all connected, we might not be, we're all responsible to our brother, right? And just like Martin Luther King said, I can't be all that I can be until you're all that you can be. And the beauty of St. Jude, it's a $1 billion corporation that gives away its product for free. Right. And they go so far as to patent all of their discoveries so that nobody else can profit from them, so they can give it away. And why is that successful? Because that is the model that works. And I think, we've told each other the wrong story about what success really is. Now, this is a lofty This is a lofty ideal. But again, I go back to this new generation, these young people who come out and want to go into the service industry, and they want to work for places like St. Jude. They see problems and they want to fix them, and they realize that they can't be all that they can be until someone else can. So that's why I'm so excited about that. And if that model can work in Memphis, Tennessee, there's no reason why there can't be a one-family Detroit, a one-family Dallas, and a one-family Dubai. And we have models like that work. Manchester Bidwell that I mentioned in Pittsburgh has created 8, not only in the United States, they're building one right now in a northern city of Israel that's a population of about 50,000. Half are Muslim, half are Jewish, and it's right in the center of the city.
Wow. So obviously you're a change maker. When you listen to everything that you're helping out, that you're a part of, I mean, we're just scratching the surface in all honesty. There's so many out there, though, that they want to be a change maker too. They want to make a difference. They're looking for the purpose in their life, whether it's through their business, through their just their everyday actions. What advice would you give them? You know, when you look at, because a lot of this, even the whole Tom Shadyac, it unfolds organically. These relationships, just being open, communication. I mean, everything we're talking about in terms of putting the cell phone down and interacting in real time with each other, having a genuine heart for someone and coming at it together where we are connected, we're part of one family. Having a true heart, having a true dialogue leads to amazing things. You can't predict. But where do you begin? So for those that, especially college students, the millennials, those that are even older that say, you know what, I'm plugging through every day at work, but I just can't, it doesn't make sense yet. Life doesn't make sense. What do you tell them? Where do they start? How do they get on a different path with purpose?
Right. Well, first, I'll just speak for myself. What I've discovered in my journey is that, number one, everybody has a story. And your story might not seem as dramatic as the next person, but it's no less impactful, and that you will relate to someone. And that you can't be everything to everybody, but you can be something to somebody. And I think we have to be awake about that and pursue what's already inside of us. I think God has created all of us with a passion, at least one thing that we're very interested in, and then go pursue that, whatever that is, if it's art, if it's music, if it's teaching, if it's inventing, whatever it is, and go pursue that for the love of the pursuit of it, not for the outcome, to let go of the outcome, not for the money, not for the prestige, but because that's what sets your soul aflame. And then things just happen. My tagline of the last 2 years of my life is, you just can't make this stuff up. In my journey, when I just started following that, the right people, the right situations just began to fall into place. And it's almost like it was architected to happen. And there's a real power behind that, because then you connect with people that have similar thoughts and similar desires, and that's how change happens. It starts first within, and then it goes outside.
So give me one thing that you're proud of. When you look at the impact you're having in your life, it could be business, it could be personal. Give me one thing that you're proud of.
Well, pride might not be the right word, but I think about another good friend of ours, Javier Pena, in that, you know, he uses an orchestra, because he's a musician, as a metaphor for life. And we're all a part of the orchestra. And proud, I don't know if that's the right word, but I am grateful to be in the band. And sometimes I get to be out front and have a conversation with you, or present somebody.
To have your solo moment.
To have my solo moment. Most of the time, I'm just playing a supporting role. But I get to play a piece of music that I really like, and that gives me a lot of gratitude, because the notes I get to play and the musicians I get to play with feed me.
So we're going to end with just some random questions I'm just going to throw at you. We'll do maybe 5, 6 of them, just as a fun way to get to know you a little bit better. But give us a favorite vacation spot.
Well, this might sound strange, but when I was working with Jean-Louis, he used to take me every Christmas to the French West Indies with my family, and we got to hang out over Christmas. And Santa Claus would come riding up on a motorcycle on the beach every year. It was a beautiful place to be.
Favorite memory with your wife?
Napa Valley.
One with your kids?
Every day.
Good answer. I like that one. I have to remember that one. Give me a favorite food. What do you like to eat?
Barbecue. Sorry, I'm from Memphis.
A book you've read recently that stands out.
The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
A quote that you enjoy from someone else.
Charlie Tremendous Jones. You'll be the same person in 5 years that you are today, except for the people you meet and the books that you read.
A TV show or movie?
Well, I might offend Tom when I say this, but my favorite movie is Ordinary People.
Nice. And let's see, sport, I would assume golf, but give me a sport you enjoy playing to relax.
To relax?
Or we'll say, we'll just leave it in general. A sport you enjoy playing.
Tennis.
And I know you do yoga as well, correct?
I do.
So how do you like that?
Well, that's not a sport to me. I mean, that's like a spiritual exercise. So, yeah.
And then last but not least, give us, when you talk about working with students especially, give us just your favorite bit of advice.
Well, to embrace who you are and embrace the moment, and that life is not linear. You might think that you have it all planned out, but there's certain things that you can't control. And there's another great quote that I love, and that is, God determines what happens to us. We're 100% responsible for how we go through it. So just be responsible. And, back to Tom's question, what's wrong with the world and what can we do about it? What he learned through that journey is nothing's wrong with the world. It's perfect. And we just have to navigate through that.
Yeah, life, like an oak tree, only takes as much as it needs. It absorbs just the amount of water, the nutrients. It doesn't take too much.
And
we just have to accept that.
And it gives back.
And it gives back. So tell listeners, because obviously, this is, like I said, we just scratched the surface of so many things that you're involved with. Give them an idea of where they can learn more about Master IT. How can they connect with you in general?
Yeah, the easiest place is our website. It has all of our social media sites. It's master-it.com.
So that's Michael Drake. He's the CEO, founder of Master IT. More importantly, though, he is a good friend. He's someone that's heavily involved here in the community, a family man that gives back tremendously, your time, your resources, all of your efforts. So, Michael, from my heart to yours, thank you for all you do for our city, for our great nation as well. Thanks for coming on the podcast, ChangeMakers, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I always appreciate being with you.
Thank you for listening to the ChangeMakers podcast. To learn more about our guests and to share your story of leading by example and creating change, visit us online at thelpbc.com. Connect with us online using @thelpbc or follow the conversation using the hashtag ChangeMakers. Now think big, start small, and act now. Be a changemaker.